think I am now live. I had intended to have this scheduled, but I guess I'll go live now. So let's see. So my intention was that, with this one is to go over some of my notes on listening to an interview Will Bulsiewicz did with Rich Roll. And I think that whole interview was over 2.5 hours long. I only listened to about an hour and a half of it. So I'm going to go over some of the things that I remember from it and some of my thoughts on it. So if none of you are familiar with it, he is the author of Fiber Fueled, and he's the one that got everybody talking about the importance of plant variety as it comes to our diets. So not only is it that fiber is important, but also we need to get a varying amounts of different kinds of plants for different reasons. Let's see. So he goes over a lot of the science that he's already done in his older book, but he also has a new book out. And that new book I am starting to read now. And eventually I wouldn't mind talking about that one too. But it seems like they both start out similarly, talking about the science of your microbiome, showing you that we have 39 trillion microorganisms in the colon. And that's a lot to consider. Apparently we are over half microorganisms, so it's more than being human, is how he described it. And a lot of it is affected by the food that we eat daily. He says we eat about 3 to 5 pounds of food, and it affects the inflammation that we have in our body. So some of the things that he says, we've got like 3 barriers that your food or the outside influences in our body to kind of protect us. So first of all, we've got our microbes. He said, I guess it might be 38 trillion. And a lot of that's beneficial, but some of that's pathogens. Some of that might be things like Salmonella, E. coli. And it adapts to the environment you're in. And that environment's influenced by not only the things that you consume, but the amount of stress that your body's under from varying reasons. It could just be like made up stress in your head, but it could be environmental stress. It could be a bunch of things. It sounds like he's very much like a holistic kind of doctor. He's thinking whole body health, not just what we eat. So sleep, exercise, that sort of thing. So after the microbes, you've got your gut barrier. This is what it reminds me of Esselstyn. Esselstyn would talk about your endothelium. And so that's a 1 cell thick layer or lining that it's like a filter of things that go through your body. So anything you might ingest, it has to go through this, and it's kind of a filter, which is why you want this endothelium to be protected. You don't want it to break down anywhere. You don't want anything bad to get through just because it's been inflamed. And part of that is due to the mucus it has. So let's see. It's the fiber and resistant starch that feeds different parts of your microbiome that allows for you to have good or bad mucus, which sounds kind of gross. And this is already kind of a boring topic because it's all like the sciencey parts of it, but I find it all fascinating. I've always thought the gut was fascinating as soon as I heard about it way back in the day when I went on my first vegan cruise and they were talking about the gut-brain connection. Let's see. And then the last part of it, if it can get through your microbes, your gut barrier, you've got your immune system that protects you. So that should be neutralizing pathogens and squashing infections. That's the whole point. Hi, I can't see your name, but gamers at the end of it. Hello. All right. Anyways, after I had heard about his last book, Fiber Fueled, the goal, or at least the gist of it, was we wanted to try and get 30 different plants within a week just to get that fiber variety or the plant variety. What I found interesting about Will Bulsiewicz is he's not dogmatic about anything. He's not the kind of person that'll say to somebody who eats meat that you need to totally cut out meat. I don't think he'd be pro-fruitarian either, because he seems to be a big proponent of things like legumes or different grains and such. So he's not dogmatic one way or the other. He just wants a diet that's varied in plants. But he does seem to have a lot of opinions when it comes to things like whether or not we should keep fat in our diet. So in this new book of his, I guess he's talking about things like chronic low-grade inflammation. So we know what acute inflammation looks like. It usually comes in the form of, you might see redness, swelling, fever, that kind of thing. But he's talking about the chronic stuff. And of course, a lot of these plant-based doctors, they like to talk about chronic diseases. So that to him, he's like, some of these things that you see that might be chronic disease or chronic inflammation might not be obvious to you. So it'll look like brain fog or fatigue or congestion, some skin issues or bloating. And a lot of us, we experience this and we write it off as it being nothing. Maybe it's just we didn't get enough sleep. Of course, all of that affects your microbiome, but we just write it off because it's not as obvious as a 101 degree fever. So we don't think it's a big deal. His thoughts on the carnivore diet seem like we might see some improvement. People will talk about the improvements they feel on carnivore diet, but that no fiber diet might be helpful now, and he believes that it's helpful for you because you're feeling the difference, but it's not a long-term solution. So that's why it's nice to hear him say that, but also if you're a meat eater, it sounds like you don't have to let go of all the meat either. So I like that he gives some good information for people to at least eat more plants. That's the goal. We want everybody to eat more plants. And that crowds out the meat. That's helpful in that way. Okay. He talks about the 55 studies that he has in his book. And his definition of something being hyperpalatable is whether or not you have salt, oil, and sugar inside of foods, which makes you want to overeat on them, or just consume things that are not helpful for your microbiome. And he says as long as you've got 2 out of the 3 of those things, it's considered hyperpalatable. That shouldn't be that's not new news to a lot of us. But he also likes to point out that we always look to what ancient cultures did. And this is something that Lauren mentioned this. We always look back to our history and what people of the past did. And we seem to go back to things like she was saying, like the Ice Age, or he was saying, in times where there was a lot of scarcity, rather than looking at what we have in modern times, because what we have today are modern problems. We don't have scarcity at all. We can experience any diet that we want to, most of us, for the most part. Like, we can do whichever diet we want. So why aren't we studying or trying to replicate who's doing it best now? And he was saying that the people who do it best now are things like the Mediterranean, traditional Japanese diet. So that doesn't necessarily mean the stuff that they're doing now. Just like people will argue that the Okinawans are not eating, or they think that the Okinawans eat a lot of animal products or high fat, but that's not the traditional Okinawan diet. Just like the traditional Japanese diet might not be as well promoted today. But these are the people that are probably doing it best. Traditional Japanese food, Mediterranean food. So lots of plants, low amounts of animal products. And he's not a no-fat diet kind of guy. That's what I've been learning. I'd love to see his studies on what he's referencing when it comes to some of these, the fat studies. He's claiming that we have 4 workhorses as far as things that we should be consuming that make us healthy. So fiber being the obvious one, we've been hearing about it all the time. And polyphenols, which would be eating the rainbow as far as food goes. So you've got your red cabbage, your carrots, like look for all the colors so you can get all the different micronutrients you can. And then he goes into healthy fats being something that's important. We're looking at monounsaturated fats. He said things like olive oil, olives. These are good fats to have in your diet. I'd like to see it. I know that's probably somewhere where he and Esselstyn would disagree. And I think he mentioned Esselstyn, and he said part of it is Esselstyn would say a lot of people aren't lacking fat in their diet because they're eating standard Western diet, and it already has a lot of fat, though it might not have like the right fat according to him. So Esselstyn always argued that any oil would be damaging to your endothelial cells. Well, Will argues that that's not the case, that it's actually healthy, and that a lot of, in particular, vegans are low on things like omega-3s, so they don't have their ALA, EPA, and DHA. And he, it sounds like, recommends a supplement because it's seemingly like he doesn't believe that you can eat enough flaxseed or chia seeds like Brooke Goldner might suggest to make up for what we would need. And in order to test that, he recommends, and I've never really heard anybody talk about this before, but the omega-3 index test. So apparently this is a test you can order it online, check to see where you're at, and it tests the last, like how you're doing for the last 4 months. So at least it's not like, what are you looking like for the day? And that's what I like, because those tests that don't really show you much except where you're at for that hour, I don't find them particularly helpful. And so something like this, where you're getting a longer time frame and you get more information on how you're doing, I think is a little more useful. But I'd have to look a little bit more into omega-3 index tests. So there's that too. I'm sure Jeff Nelson's probably done some videos on this particular topic, so I might have to go and see what he had to say about it. He does not recommend things like fish oil for the obvious reasons. The reasons why a lot of us don't eat fish, besides the animal rights aspect of it. But there's a lot of heavy metals in fish and a lot of microplastics in fish. It's just not a health food that we all seem to be told it is. I know a lot of pescatarians are labeled as some of the healthiest, but the things that are contaminating our fish today are not things that would make one healthy. So again, olive oil, good. Flax and chia seeds, good, according to him. And an algae supplement. And then this is where it gets, once again, a little sketchy. Whenever I see some doctor recommending something that they are themselves also selling as a supplement, it makes you just think, like, is it something you need or is it something he's just trying to sell? So I wish that these doctors who made these recommendations weren't also making money on a supplement. And I also realize he says that there's a hole in the industry that he felt the need to create this supplement because it's what's missing. But it also makes it look like you're just saying whatever you're saying about fats just so you can sell your supplement. So it gives a lot of us trust issues for good reason. And then another thing I appreciated about this was he talked about seed oils. And I've been annoyed by the conversation around seed oils because I've been a no oil person for a very long time. So I've been saying all oils are bad for so long. But all of a sudden, this no seed oil thing seemed to be more of an attack on vegans just because it would be the people who don't want dairy products that would likely be having more seed oils. And I'm glad he said something about it because it's not always, is this bad or is it good? But is it bad compared to what? Is it good compared to what? Well, seed oils, he would claim, is good if you're comparing it to somebody who eats butter and cream. Probably bad for somebody who doesn't eat oil at all. So it's just something to think about. If you're not able to get rid of your oils or your fats in that way, sounds like seed oils are a better option than going with butter, going with lard. Even though the food pyramid is now recommending both of those things. But we, like he said, we need to reference the studies, not reference what it is that's trendy now. And given that he talked about how we went from plant-based diets being super trendy to all of a sudden carnivore diets being super trendy within a 3-year span, he recognizes that science doesn't work like that. Nowhere in the science did it say, now carnivore diets are perfect. No, the science has still been supporting plant-based diets this whole time. It's just carnivore diets are now just trendy. So we talked about fiber, polyphenols, and healthy fats, and he said the fourth workhorse as far as our diets go is fermented food. And that's not something that a lot of us think about. Maybe some cultures more than others. But when you're thinking about fermented food, a lot of people now go with sauerkraut or kimchi, but we also have to think things like sourdough, miso paste he brought up. We do consume miso in my house. Tempeh, and then yogurt. He's like, for those who are still eating dairy, yogurt's good. But also consider that there are plant-based yogurts, and they also have fermented plant milks. So as far as all the food part goes and what he was talking about, I like what he has to say because it's about variety and it's not about dogma. And even for somebody who's high carb, low fat, I think you can get on board with the majority of his messaging. And if there's a concern about the fat side of things, there's a test out there for it. If you think you're fine, get tested. Or if you're feeling fine, that's the thing. You look up the reasons you would take this test, and it's mostly if you're not feeling great. If you're feeling fine, then it seems like you don't really need the test because nobody's really worried about it. So moving on to the things that he talked about that were outside of food are things I really appreciate. So he said, once again, when you're looking at your whole health, we are also looking at stress, your circadian rhythm. He's like the amount of importance that should be going into things like the consistency in your day, the time you wake up, the times you have meals, the times you go to sleep. If you had those be consistent every single day, you would find improvement in your health all around. So I've been preaching this idea of consistency, not perfection. And it sounds like he's right on board with it. I don't think that I'm perfect with the consistency thing, but like I said, it's not about being perfect. But all around, all these things help with lowering inflammation in your body. And overall, if you have a lower, less inflammation in your body, the healthier you are, the less chance you have for that chronic disease. What I liked about his talk about the circadian rhythm was he was calling to the importance of that sun, that we evolved with the sun. And it's really important if we could get outside. And this is why I keep talking about let's get outside. There's so many benefits to being able to go outside besides just the exercise. Not only could you get exercise from being outside, you're getting fresh air, you're getting sunshine on your skin. That sunshine on your skin first thing in the morning tells your body it's morning and this is the time I expect to see the sun. And so that was his recommendation, making sure you get like an hour of sunshine first thing in the morning. It's more important to get it in the morning than it is to get it later on in the day. But do what you can, within your means. If you can only get sunshine later in the day, then get sunshine later in the day. But it's about getting out there. And some other reasons why it's nice to get outside. It's good for your eyes. It's good for your skin. Not just because you're getting that light in your eyes or on your skin, but it's the way your body reacts to it too. And the temperatures. Like, we need to give our bodies the ability to practice being in environments that are not as perfect as it is inside of our homes. We keep our houses at a specific temperature, specific humidity, and a certain level of comfort that doesn't allow our bodies to actually practice what it is to be in hot weather, hot, sticky weather, to being in cold, dry weather. And because we don't practice this, it's like your body's probably not going to be very good at adapting. So, like with anything, we need to practice. And it is natural. It's unnatural that we're inside all day. Have you ever gone camping? Like, we go camping every year, and that experience kind of resets you. And that's, the being outside part of it is the reason why. That's why we all feel better. It's why we all go to sleep so much earlier, assuming you're not just eating junk and drinking alcohol the whole time. So we go out in nature, we spend some time waking up with the sun, going to bed with the sun going down, and it's good for your health. Some of the people, if that kind of stuff interests you, I would look into Katie Bowman. She's got a lot of books on these topics, and I was obsessed with her. She has a great podcast called Move Your DNA. I think that's what it's still called. She has a lot to say about movement, nature, and basically stacking habits so you're not having to separate it all. For example, like a walk. Make your walk, like, let's drive about however long it takes to get to your store, a mile out from the store. Park, walk the mile that you need to get to the store with your family. Get some socialization in, alone time with your kids, outdoor time with the sunshine and the light and the environment. The exercise it is to get there and get back. Like, we're doing all these important things all within one task of getting to the store and getting some groceries. So we have engineered difficulty right out of our lives, and that's what makes us so unhealthy. This is why I try to teach my kids how to put it back into our lives, which can make it feel like it's inconvenient. But unfortunately, it's why we're all so sick and fat. Unfortunately, like, I don't like to say it that way, but that's why we made our lives so easy. It's why we are sick. I am doing a whole unit on potential and kinetic energy in my chemistry and physics class with the kids. And one of the things I have to talk about was how way back in the day, we had to go out and find our wood to find some energy to burn so that we could get some food, chemical energy to cook, so we could ingest it to give our bodies more energy so we could go and find more food and water. But eventually, we had stores, we had markets, we didn't have to hunt for our food anymore. So that's less energy being spent doing that. We made our lives a lot easier, and by doing that, we now have the ability to store so much energy right on our bodies, which is also hurting our bodies. So my daughter asked, why is it that people who have a lot of stored energy, why don't they just use that energy? And it's a funny question, because you would think that if you had more stored energy on your body, it would be easier to move and get going with life. But it's not the case. Obviously, we know that because more mass equals more work that has to be done in order to move that mass. That's just basic physics. And then when you go, when you go into the topic of biology, it's like, where is that excess mass? Like, what's it doing to the hormones in your body? What's it doing to the organs in your body? And so it's like it just keeps going down and down, and we're harming ourselves by having too much energy on our body because we've built such an easy world to live in that our newest issue is just being able to be healthy because we live in excess. We live in a lifestyle that's too easy. So, overall, the things that really resonated with me on this conversation, and I won't go into the last part of his whole video or interview. The last part, he goes a little bit more into the psychology of it, and I'll leave that up to you guys to watch. I was told it was very moving, and I probably don't have a lot to say as far as the psychology of it, except for, I also believe that a good attitude is very helpful for healing. that might be what he was talking about. But I know that fiber is a good thing. Getting outside is absolutely a good thing to do. And the things I'd like to look into more are his claims on fat, the studies he'd referenced on fat consumptions in the right, the correct fats, not the not the saturated fats, not the trans fats, things like that. So I'd like to see his studies on fats and how that's beneficial to humans. And overall, I like the nuance he allowed when it came to this conversation about diets, how he wasn't dogmatic, and how it's about doing better than what you were doing before. So I appreciate that kind of messaging. I'm also thinking about sort of doing a little bit of a book clubby thing. Maybe I would read a chapter. I don't know if I want to do his first book, Fiber Fueled, or just his or something. But I was thinking something where I read a chapter and maybe discussed. You guys let me know if that's something you're interested in. Just tell me in the comments. But I may or may not get into that. So let me know what you think. That's all I have to say on that conversation. I've just started his latest book, and so far it sounds a lot like his other book. But it's good to have that overview and reminder. So that's all I have for now. I hope you all have a great day.